Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for this webinar on digital tools for Get Out the Count through CommunityConnect Labs. As you probably know, Asian Americans Advancing Justice is working to ensure a full and accurate count of our communities in the 2020 census. And as a national hub, we're working to develop curriculum and materials to support your Get Out the Count work, including fact sheets, toolkits, webinars, social media graphics, in-language materials, and more. Today, we're excited to dive deeper into the valuable tools offered by CommunityConnect Labs. As you may know, this webinar is a sixth installment of our monthly census webinar series, which we launched in August 2018. If you missed our previous webinars and want to tune in, you can access them with the links on the next slide. Our next webinar is taking place next Monday on March 25th, and it will focus on fundraising. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Stephanie Kim. CommunityConnect Labs enables government and service providers to use mobile messaging to connect with hard-to-reach populations. Stephanie is the Director of Government and Nonprofit Programs at CommunityConnect Labs, where she drives the design, development, and implementation of census outreach solutions. Stephanie managed the implementation of CommunityConnect Labs' community-based address canvassing tool for 4 county and city clients across 3 states, coordinating with county leaders, city staff, local funders, community-based organizations, and dozens of canvassers to ensure a successful operation. Stephanie brings a background in social impact strategy and operations, specializing in workforce development, social entrepreneurship, and corporate social responsibility. We will have Q&A at the end of this webinar, and you can use the chat box to send your questions or raise your hand to have your line unmuted so you can ask the question yourself. If you have questions during the presentation, please also use the chat box to send us your questions. I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and thanks so much, AAJC, for hosting me. I hear a little echo. Let's fix that before we get started. Okay, great, that's fixed. Oh, nope, the echo is still there. Are you able to hear me at least?
Yeah, we hear you. There's no echo on our end.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, everyone. So, like our gracious host mentioned, we have developed a mobile messaging technology, and we use that to help government and community-based organizations to engage these traditionally hard-to-reach communities. So we actually do a lot of work that's not census related. For instance, right now we are in the thick of tax season, and we do an annual earned income tax credit outreach campaign, partnering with county governments, organizations like the United Ways, community-based organizations to help people access these types of tools and services. We got involved with the census about almost 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago at this point, with the local updated census addresses program, as was mentioned. And that was our first foray into really working with the Census Bureau, working with counties and cities and organizations on this first phase of making sure that the census master address file is up to date and people will be receiving census forms in the first place. In places like where we are in California, that's especially important, given that a lot of people over the last 10 years have moved into unconventional housing units like garages and sheds. So in thinking about this grand scheme of ensuring a complete count, we need to make sure that the database is up to date. So since then, we've been working a lot with counties and with complete count committees and nonprofits to think ahead to the next steps, which are getting out the count, ensuring that people in these hardest to reach communities, whether they're young people, renters, students, communities of color, immigrants, what have you, that they all feel compelled and activated to participate. So we've developed a suite of tools that correspond to the main strategies that we've been seeing floating up in various complete count committees from across California to across the country. I'm going to go over those strategies and then talk through how some of our tools correspond to them. And then I'll talk a little bit afterwards on just the way that the technology works. If we have time, I could show a little demo, but I definitely want to save time for questions. So I'll move into that. The strategies for educating, motivating, and activating hard-to-count communities. Like I said, we've been to many complete count meetings at this point, and the tools that we've developed have been done so with feedback and input from the Census Bureau, which is super valuable, in addition to user interviews with local governments and with people from these hard-to-count communities. And what we found is that even though each of the strategies in each region is different, which makes sense. People are of different demographics. The hard to count challenges are different in each region. We did identify these 5 key strategies that people just tend to have wherever they are, and then it's tailored locally. So the first strategy is around establishing that local network of multilingual and virtual assistance centers. Now, if you recall from back in 2010, the census actually established these census assistance centers for people to go to fill out their census in person on these paper forms. But now that the census is online and over the phone, and given the budget cuts, these centers have just not been included in the census plan. And it's really on local organizations who are these trusted messengers, where places that people already go to receive other services. Everyone's really looking to them to serve as that place where people can go in and get assistance. But the challenge that arises from there then is, how do people actually know that these centers exist? And how do they know which one to go to based on what they need? Maybe they speak a certain language, maybe they live in a certain area. And so while there is going to be, no matter what, a network of these centers, we decided to put together a tool that helps people figure out where to access them. So the second tool, or the second strategy that I'm going to talk about, is really amplifying the recruitment efforts and workforce development for job candidates. So the census, as you know, needs to hire close to 500,000 people in the next year to work largely in the field, but also in the office. Given the strong employment that is currently our reality right now, it's really difficult to recruit candidates who are willing to work for a job that is so far away. But the recruitment does need to start now because of the significant volume of people who need to be hired. It's an online application. You do need to currently be a U.S. citizen, 18 years or older, to apply. In 2010, there were waivers issued for green card holders who spoke certain languages. So there could be a possibility of that happening again. But as of right now, it's a very specific group of people who need to apply and work for a job. And, the census is doing their recruitment efforts, but it's really on thinking about how these enumerators, for instance, are the last line of defense for a complete count, making sure that we're flooding the pipelines with these local candidates who reflect the communities that they're counting and who speak the local languages, and having them be the ones to knock on doors. That's how we can ensure a complete count. The third strategy is around just the overall marketing and outreach. So every region is going to have some sort of marketing campaign. Some places have put together slogans, put together websites, some have put together logos, but whatever it is, it has to involve such a diverse group of organizations in order to really reach all the corners of the region that they're trying to reach, and to also make heard and make seen all the different populations that are in this hard to count group. And so it's going to involve a lot of organizations. It's going to involve this timeline. And, as we know in 2020, it's an election year. And it's a pretty big election year. So there's just going to be a lot happening in the airwaves, and these complete count committees need a way to coordinate and streamline and make sure that not only are the messages consistent and clear, but also relevant to the various groups that they're trying to reach. So we developed a tool around that. Fourth, we are aware that a lot of groups are going to be doing boots on the ground outreach. So census is a form of participatory democracy, and it's going to involve some door knocking to get people activated and educated and motivated to participate and get out the count. And so there are certain canvassing tools that exist, anything from pencil and paper and printing out maps to existing canvassing tools that have been used for elections, for instance. But we developed a tool to support the specifically census-related canvassing to get out the count. So I'll talk about that. And then lastly, the strategy that I'll talk about is around responding to misinformation campaigns. So this is something where, we're already starting to see, people are saying census does not count people who are not citizens, or census does not count children under 5. Census is happening this year, not next year. There's so many ways that can suppress the census count, and the organizations who are on the front lines and working with these people are the best positioned to identify what exactly these campaigns are and to communicate them with each other and then to counter message them. So lastly, we developed a tool around that. Backing up a bit about our tools, so we have focused on mobile messaging. in other words, it's text messaging, but it could also be on Facebook Messenger, it could be online, WeChat, what have you. And the reason why we focus on that is because it is a low-tech, high-tech solution where text has been around for quite a bit. If you're thinking about, for instance, people who are living in poverty as one subset of potentially hard to count individuals, 90% of them actually have a mobile phone, as opposed to just a third of them having landlines. And if you're thinking about people who move around a lot, their addresses are changing, their landlines are changing, their cell phone numbers tend to stick with them. We know that 95% of Americans text every day, and people read their text quickly and respond to their text quickly. We've imagined a tool that would work on our grandma's phones. So if your grandma wants to text in Chinese, she could also do that. Everything in this interaction it should be free for most data plans out there, and it's confidential. And lastly, going back to my comment about your grandma texting in Chinese, we can do over 200 Unicode languages to make sure that people are being communicated with in the languages that they speak. So all of these tools that I'm about to talk about, the way to get people enrolled into them is to market it out. So every organization is going to do some sort of marketing outreach campaign, but the call to action is usually, census is happening, it's important, please participate. Or the census is hiring, it's a great job, go and apply. What we are proposing for using these tools is providing a more short-term and concrete call to action, which is the census is happening, it's important. If you want to receive information and updates from, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, for instance, then text, chamber to this local phone number, and you will receive messages and updates and reminders from us. So people are opting in to a trusted organization's interactions. And then the other way for people to get involved with this tool is for them to receive an outbound message. So if you see, for instance, on the left here, this is an example of a job training organization. It could be a community college, it could be an adult education program, it could be a library that sends a message out to a list of phone numbers that they have, inviting them to opt in and participate. We really want to emphasize that no matter how people engage with it, whether they see a flyer and they text in, maybe their case manager tells them something and then they text in, maybe they receive a text from an organization or a community college that they're already associating with. At no point is this like, those like election messages that you get where, people text you and you're like, who are you? How did you get my number? Did you buy it from somewhere? Please stop bothering me. This is only about texting from trusted messengers. We believe that it's such an important part of census outreach and getting out the count, really going with these organizations that people know they could trust for information. So let's get into the tools. So our first tool is the Community Motivator tool. Now this is, you could imagine, just a coordinated, automated drip marketing campaign, which we can launch really as soon as next month, which is 1 month out from census, or 1 year out from census. Oh gosh, we'd be in trouble if it was 1 month out. 1 year out from census, but we could also launch it as late as, say, 1 month before census. And the whole goal of this is to get people enrolled to receive updates from your organization. And then from there, you could send out messages such as, hey, it's March 12th, Census just mailed their forms out. Make sure you look in your mailbox and see that you're going to receive a code to go online. We'll give instructions on that. We could say, hey, it's April 1st, it's Census Day. We're going to have a community barbecue in this neighborhood park. Bring your census card, get a free coffee after you fill it out, have some fun. You could say, hey, it's November. We are a few months out from census and we are knocking on doors. Would you like to volunteer for us and to help get out the count? We could send a message late April of 2020 saying, hey, just so you know, if you did not yet respond to the census online, on paper, or over the phone, the census will be sending out people to knock on your door. Just so you know, they'll be wearing these badges and this uniform, and you should participate. So this is a way to just communicate with people, direct them to resources, direct them to events, counter any misinformation you might be hearing, saying, just a reminder, we've been getting a lot of questions about if people who are not citizens count on the census, they definitely count on the census. So this is an overall marketing campaign that you could just set and let run on its own, but there's also a lot of customization that could be done. The Community Motivator tool works really well with our Canvassing Optimizer tool. So this canvasser has been built with the intention for use for census. We know, as I mentioned, that boots on the ground outreach is going to be a significant part of census outreach and get out the count efforts. And so this is a tool where an administrator or an organization can easily cut and assign turf using census tracts and block groups. Volunteers can easily just watch a 2-minute video and learn how to use the tool. They will just follow their map. They will click on a house. They will fill out a easy Q&A, which asks questions like, was a resident home? Did you canvass the resident? Did you leave a flyer? Did the resident want to receive more updates from our organization? Or maybe this is not a house anymore. Maybe the resident is hostile and says, do not contact again. And then you have this display for both the user and the administrator on, which houses have been hit, which ones need to be followed up with again. So you can really see that we've tried to design something that is user-friendly, both for the canvasser, the volunteers, but also for the administrators who need to be reporting out on their activities. The third tool is our tool to help with the census recruitment of field and office staff. Now, we're focusing mostly on field staff because that is the most significant recruitment lift. And we've created a virtual coach, so to speak, for people who want to apply for census jobs. So like I mentioned, you could go through your library, community college, job training program, workforce development board, chamber of commerce, and send out information about the census jobs. In the city of San Jose in California, for instance, these jobs pay $30 an hour. They're part-time, they're flexible, they're really great for a variety of populations. So the main challenge is getting them aware about the job and then getting them through the online application and the online assessment, and then through the long pipeline that follows. So this tool, if people text in, they'll receive a video. It's 2 to 3 minutes in English and Spanish. It will take them through the application process. It will provide a checklist of items that they need to apply. For instance, if you're a male candidate, you need to put in your selective service number. Now, that's the number that people just don't have in their back pockets all the time, like their social. So it's something that they need to know in advance before starting their application in order to be successful. And again, our hopes is that with local organizations and local governments involved with supporting the recruitment of field staff like enumerators, that is really contributing to getting out the count, because the people who are knocking on the doors are like, our folks, so to speak. They're the ones who we know reflect the communities that they're counting, and they speak the local languages. In the meantime, we could also track, because of the survey functionality that this tool has, we could see that this zip code has, predominantly a Vietnamese-speaking population, and we don't have a lot of Vietnamese-speaking candidates. We could up our outreach for people through organizations, perhaps, that serve this population. So this allows us to react to current progress and then to adjust our strategies accordingly. The fourth tool is a help desk. So we were working in Rhode Island during the time of the end-to-end test this last year, and one of the things we learned was that the local governments, the local organizations, their phone lines were flooded with phone calls once the test started, with people calling in asking, is this the real census? Do I need to participate? The number one question that was asked was, can we do this on a paper form? This obviously hotline was not available at all hours of the day. If you're thinking about people who might be doing their census forms on a Sunday evening, for instance, or maybe they need assistance in a certain language, there was a significant gap there. So we devised this tool, which is an AI chatbot that can answer these types of questions in multiple languages. We are creating right now and training this bot with a library of answers. And we're also using this tool to direct people to the nearest place where they could get assistance. So for instance, if we are working in a certain county, say Los Angeles, and we are able to get from them a list of all the different organizations, whether it's the library, the YMCA, maybe it's the social services office, places where people could go and receive help on the census, then based on people's location and their language needs, then we could direct them to the appropriate place. No more going to places where the doors are shuttered, or it's not open, or people are not available in that language. Like all the other tools, this also provides a lot of valuable data on the back end. So you're able to see who's asking what questions. We don't ask for people's names because we want to maintain some confidentiality, but we could see that a lot of people in this particular neighborhood who speak this particular language all seem to be asking if people who are not citizens count on the census. So if that's the case, maybe you could update your outreach efforts to really focus and clarify that question. So again, another way for just informing and having a data-driven get out the count strategy. The last tool that we've developed, gosh, these are a lot. The last tool we've developed is a misinformation reporter. So we're thinking about, again, these organizations that are on the front lines, their ears are to the ground, they're talking with people from these hard to count communities, and they're also often cued into these chat interfaces or other places where information is shared, where it could be a source for misinformation. So this is not a tool for the general user walking down the street. This is a tool for organizations, and they would be able to report anything from a URL to a social media post or a video, a screenshot maybe of a private chat. It could be a picture of a flyer that they see on the street, or GPS pin of a kiosk that they think is not legitimate. There are multiple things they could report, and this would go into a centralized network of partners who can really look into the extent of this campaign and push back information that could then inform all the relevant impacted partners about this. So that's the misinformation tool. I'll just briefly recap how all of these solutions work again, and then I'll open it up to questions. So like I mentioned, our field staff recruiter tool, for instance, we've developed with the Census Accelerator program, which we presented just a few weeks ago, and we're currently piloting in a few regions. This tool has gone through, all of our tools really have gone through extensive input and feedback, not only from the census, but from the actual users, the government, the nonprofit, the community-based, and the individual organizations and people who would be using these tools. Again, we could support over 200 Unicode languages, and there's no need to download an app, and there's no need for any text banking. So this is just on your computer, in your platform, you go in and you press a button, and then the tool does its thing. We integrated to Facebook Messenger, Line, WeChat, and other messaging apps. And then we have robust reporting with potential integration into existing platforms. So all really the role of our partners who would be using these is to line up their local resources. So tell us, okay, in this region, in this ecosystem, we'll have these 5 organizations that are running the Get Out the Count initiative. These are the staff point people. We need, X many languages, and we will work with you to translate. And then we just provide flyers, we provide the training, we provide toolkits on marketing, templates, and we obviously provide the actual tools and the tech support and the data monitoring and reporting that comes in. And this spans, again, this could launch as early as the next few months, as late as early 2020, and it could run through July or August of 2020 when the actual census is happening. So I lied. I'm going to show you a quick demo of how one of these tools work, just so you could get a feel for it. So what you're seeing now is my cell phone screen. And what you could assume is that maybe I'm a community college student and I saw a flyer that advertised census jobs. So I texted a keyword into a local phone number, and this is customized to the organization that is sending information out. Obviously, message and data rates may apply, and we ask them to opt in by pressing start. So this does recognize other answers. If you, for okay or yes or sure, maybe, all of that we've trained it to recognize, as well as typos. Let's see if I could multitask this. So we collect their location information. I live in Oakland, California, so that's what I typed in. And then for jobs, because we want to track who is applying from where and what languages they speak, we asked them if they could communicate in any other languages besides English. So let's say that this is 10 years ago, and I am still fluent in languages that I should have been fluent in, but I am no longer anymore. But we're able to collect languages. And then this last question we ask is the only question that is a requirement for census jobs, and that's if they're a U.S. citizen and 18 years of age or older. Now, we make sure that on our flyers it's clear that citizenship is a current requirement. And if you notice here, we framed it as a compound question. So if people reply no, then we don't know why. And we have a few additional follow-up questions to make sure that we're categorizing them in the right place. So it looks like I meet the basic qualifications. We send a little video, and it takes me through, like an additional process where they ask for my email address. They're going to actually email me instructions. Because email is a required part of the census job application, we're trying to check if they have one. If they say they don't have an email address, we direct them to Gmail to create one. So this is just an example of how it feels. As you see, it's like texting with your friend or family member. It's really simple, and on the back end, again, we're able to see every single action and response that is been shared, and at no point here has my name been shared. So they're using my phone number as my unique identifier. So, I think I lost there we go. That is all that I have right now to present. I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of time for questions because I just threw a lot of information at you. We have 2 websites. So our organization, CommunityConnectLabs.com, you could visit that to see some of our other work that we do, our earned income tax credit outreach, our utilities assistance, our surveys. But Census is such a big and important beast of its own that we created censusoutreach.org. You can find some information not only about the census and its timeline and previous webinars that we've done, but it also has an overview of all of our tools. And if you are interested in learning more, you could definitely feel free to email me, and I'd love to chat. So from there, I'll turn it back over to our moderators for any Q&A. Thanks so much for the chance to share about our work.
Hey everyone, so we're going to move into Q&A. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing that information. And again, to ask a question, you can either type it into the chat box and I can read it out, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute your line and you can ask the question directly. We'll take a few seconds to let people submit their questions. So the first question is from Michelle. Where do the addresses in this tool come from?
That's a great question, Michelle. So in the spirit of working with trusted messenger organizations, if we are sending messages outwards, it is with the contact list that these organizations currently have. So there's no purchasing contact list or downloading them from any other place. It's if you are a job training organization, for instance, and you already have the phone numbers of your clients from the past year. And the first message that goes out is an opt-in message. And if people say they do not want to participate, then they are not bothered again. For our canvassing tool, that one, if you're talking about addresses there, we cut the turf based on census tracts. So for canvassing, usually when you have hard to count neighborhoods, you want to hit every house in that neighborhood. So we do not upload addresses like you would do for, say, a political canvassing tool, since we're not trying to hit targeted houses as much.
Thank you. And sorry, I wanted to add, so there's also a questions box on GoToWebinar. So you can submit your questions either the questions box, the chat box, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute your line. And we do have a few hands raised. So we are unmuting Jeannie Klein if you want to ask your question.
I might have missed some part of this seminar about that timeline for application process. So could you recap, the timeline for that?
Do you mean the timeline for the census job?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you go to, and the exact website escapes me, but it's like 2020 census jobs, 2020census.gov/jobs, or if you Google that, you'll actually be able to see that the field job application portal is currently live. So for instance, it went live last September and I submitted my application back then. The census is doing 2 recruitment pushes. So the first big recruitment operation is going to be for address listers who are going to be working between August and October of this year, of 2019, to verify some of the addresses on their master address file. So people want to be submitting their applications now, and the hires are going to be made likely in the May-June season. And then after the address listing operation and that recruitment is finished, the big recruitment push is going to be for census enumerators. Now, the formal recruitment timeline for that is between September 2019 through February 2020. And then they're going to make their selections in March. They're going to have paid training sessions and deploy people by the end of April. And then we anticipate that for census enumerators, they'll be working part-time for 6 to 8 weeks, sometime between April and July of 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have another question, a hand raised from Iridane Sanchez. We're unmuting your line.
Hi, I'm sorry, I may have missed this. I jumped on a little bit late. And maybe these are more kind of technical questions about the tool itself, but is this an app or is it like web-based?
Yeah, so we have a platform that is similar to, if you ever used like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, it's a similar concept where you can log in and you see all these tools built in, and then you press a button and then it sends text messages out to people. So the end user, the folks in these hard to count communities, they're using their text messaging on their phones. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Because I did have a follow-up, but maybe because it is texting, I guess that's why, it makes sense that folks are texting in responses versus having like click yes or no types of situations. Is that why everything is essentially a type in or write in field?
Yes, that is correct. For our canvassing tool, and in fact, we're working on putting some of these onto a Webflow online where you could just tap a button. We recently did a survey, for instance, where our client wanted happy faces for people to tap on. So you have like your happy face, your medium face, and your sad face to show their experience or their thought about something. So we do have that functionality. And gosh, I was going to say something else. Oh yeah, so my current phone is a Google Pixel, and Google phones, I don't know about iPhones, when I'm texting with someone, they also suggest answers for me, which is kind of creepy and high tech now. So if the text asks me a yes or no question, then I do get a yes bubble that pops up that I could tap. And the platform is trained to recognize whether you put Y or yes or okay, for instance. So yeah, we do have the type in options for people with the most basic phones if we're thinking about Lifeline phones or Obama phones, but we do have a more complex functionality for people to tap their answer.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
Great, and we have a few questions coming in through the chat box. The first is from Scott. What do you think makes the Community Motivator tool better than using Relay and creating a campaign where live texters are talking to people?
Sure. So I don't think our tools are necessarily better. I think that Relay and other peer-to-peer tools like Hustle have been in the participatory democracy space for a while. Obviously, we know them from our election work. The key difference is that we are not a peer-to-peer platform. We've actually intentionally made it so that people are not text banking from their phones, and you do not need to have like a person who is, texting with all these multiple people. Rather, it is a platform where we upload contacts, we press one button, and we have a message sent out to a specific group of people, and all these people know who is messaging them because they are a participant. Maybe they pick up food from this food pantry. So it makes sense that the food pantry wants them to also be counted for the census. So we're not going to argue that our approach is superior to another, but for the purpose of census, which is very different from elections, to go to an election and to cast a vote, the stakes are seemingly a little different if you're being asked to instead divulge more personal information about yourself, especially in this current climate. People will, during elections, even if they didn't vote, they'll lie and they'll tell you that they voted. Whereas census does not have that same sort of conception about people participating. So for those reasons, we're really focused on going through organizations and having an organizational platform to talk to people as opposed to peer-to-peer. And resource-wise, we also think that it will be much more efficient. Yes, you could get a lot of volunteer text bankers who bring their own phones to do that, but why when you could also just have a single person on a terminal pressing a button?
Thanks. And another question. This is from Valeria. What other data is supplemented on the canvassing tool other than the address itself?
So, I'm guessing that this is data for the administrator to see. So for the administrator, because the canvasser is going to be answering a series of questions, and they'll actually be tapping the answer to the question. Things like, is this an actual residence? Was the resident canvassed? Maybe what language was the canvassing done in? Did the resident fill out the census? Depending on the time that this canvassing is done, we have different options for scripts that could be selected. Did this resident request a follow-up? Did this resident enroll in the Community Motivator texting program? Every single one of those responses will be recorded and viewable in a dashboard for the administrator. And when you basically sign in as the user to claim a turf and to walk that turf, and then the marks on the map that show where you're going, they change color according to the result of that interaction. So that if you're the next person to claim that turf, you are only visiting the houses that are still green, for instance. And this prevents the redundancy that often happens for canvassing when they're like, I just talked to someone yesterday saying the exact same things. Why are you asking me these again? So this will hopefully streamline that. And then again, from the back end, the administrator's view, they're able to pull reports live, real time.
Thanks. And then we have questions from Amy and Sophia. Is there a cost for communities who use these tools from CommunityConnect Labs? Are these tools available to everyone? And how does a person or organization apply to employ these tools?
Yes, that's a great question. So we are a nonprofit, and our main clients are counties, cities, and nonprofits. So what we are doing is we're partnering with Complete Count initiatives and local counties to contract these tools from us, and then we would deploy them in the region with a select group of organizations that are leading the Get Out the Count efforts. So I would say, depending on where you are, our coverage right now is pretty vast in California, just because California has issued a big pool of funding for census outreach efforts, and we're currently in the process of contracting with entities to use these tools in those various geographies. If you are in wherever region you're in, I would encourage you to reach out to your Complete Count committee and find not only the person who is sort of, calling the shots on what the strategy is, making sure that there is some sort of mobile messaging outreach component, because if you looked at the recent CBAM study that came out in the focus group, text messages were actually the #1 requested means of follow-up from these hard to count people. So it's something that needs to be in the strategy, and it adds a lot of scalability, especially in areas where you have to do a lot more with a lot less funding. So it will either be a foundation leading the charge, a large nonprofit or an advocacy organization, or it could be the local county government that will sponsor the tool.
And we do have a hand raised from Iridine Sanchez, so we are unmuting your line.
Oh, sorry. I thought I typed in my question. I didn't realize I raised my hand too. So I guess I have 2 questions. Do you all have data that's preloaded into the tool or app with hard to count areas, or do folks need to load their own data to like canvass or text people?
So for canvassing, we're pulling the maps that are used are just census tracts and block groups. So we're pulling those maps from a central database that exists publicly. And then for the outreach to actual hard to count groups through trusted messenger or organizations, we are relying on the data that they're providing. So again, we do not want to purchase phone numbers. We do not want to use voter database phone numbers. We want people who are just connected to these organizations to be receiving messages, and or we want people to be seeing some sort of advertisement that is, sponsored from this organization, and then they choose to text in themselves.
Gotcha.
So we come preloaded with the tools, the modules, but the actual contacts, those populate in the region based on the regional activity.
So with you all having census tracts and block groups, it like, I guess for like the canvassing, do houses show up for those tracts where then people go and knock based off that, you know, data for that house showing up, and then they're able to add in the person level information? Or do you all provide the person level information? Like, how does that all make its way into the tool?
Right. So say the organization is going to canvass this group of census block groups and census tracts. They would pull the turf from our database, and it will cut for them. They could also cut it themselves if they want to draw the lines, and then they could print out these maps to give to canvassers, or they could just access these maps on their phones. And what they'll see is sort of how, I can't access the screen now, but there was a map with those houses, and they have little green check marks next to them. So depending on where you're walking, each map that they'll see has each house there. And each house will have a button you could press. It opens up the survey screen. They answer the questions about whether this household was canvassed and the other information you want to collect. And then you submit it, it closes that, and then that color changes. And then that's the information that goes to update the dashboard in the back end.
Gotcha, thank you, that's helpful. And then, well, I had a second question, but I'll defer if other folks have questions. I don't want to take up too much space.
You can go ahead and ask. We still have another 16 minutes left for questions, and we do have 5 questions.
Okay, awesome. So, I guess this is kind of answered in the idea of like having households and being able to go and essentially collect any type of information when you're there. But then I guess my question was, what if you bump into someone at an event or on a street corner and you don't really have like the data, your walking map, whatever might be pre-cut for a person like that you just bump into randomly? Can you somehow add information for people, situations like that?
I see what you're saying. So I would say the canvassing tool is best used for if you want to hit neighborhoods, like if you want to cover geography. If you're trying to track and report on just the number of people who've been outreached to around census, the best measure of that, I would say, would actually be from the Community Motivator tool, because your goal is to enroll as many people into this tool to receive updates as possible. For the canvassers, for instance, even them, they're going to be talking to folks, and ideally they could say, hey, can I enroll you to receive updates from us? So we're not knocking on your door 6 more times between now and census. All the future interactions will be via text. So ultimately, when you're pulling your reports from the Community Motivator tool, you could see that X many people have been reached. These many have been enrolled because they've been canvassed door to door. These many people, they came to the table at the farmer's market and they signed up there. These many people saw the billboard or saw a flyer on the bus.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions.
Thanks. And we have another question from Julia. And this question is, can organizations make changes to the Q&A response in the help desk app if they want to personalize the message to their communities?
So to a certain extent, we could talk about that. We are currently in the process of training our help desk to make sure that the answers are, verified, legitimate answers to the questions, and they're grounded in truth. That said, we know that there is some level of customization that is, we've been asked that a few times, and so we could figure out how to make that work. I think, we haven't developed that yet, but it's something that we think is going to be a need. So it's something we'd be happy to talk about. If we're thinking about consistency in answers, there's only so much customization we could do. But at the same time, if we're going through these trusted messenger voices, obviously those voices need to have input into the answers.
Thanks. And one question from Tara. It sounds like you could have multiple customers, for example, nonprofits and municipalities across many communities. Would you be able to see how well communities across a state or region are responding to the census? In other words, would there be a more aggregate understanding of how outreach is faring?
Ideally, I think if we could cover a state, that would be awesome. If you're in California, for instance, the state is actually developing its own reporting mechanism. It's called SWORD, like the weapon, Statewide Outreach something database. The acronym escapes me, but that is what they would actually are asking the counties who are contracting with the state for funding and also community-based organizations to use. We have actually built our tool to integrate into the SWORD platform so that as the data comes in, these organizations are not spending their time on reporting, they're spending their time on outreach. And we want our the data that's coming into our tool to just seamlessly feed into that. So if that's the case, the state of California SWORD administrators do have that macro ecosystem-wide view of census outreach and would be able to feed information back down that way. And so we could see ourselves supporting in that way. For other states, I am not so familiar with the statewide platforms that they might be using, but we definitely would want to have those conversations and integrate where possible, again, with the goal of just alleviating that reporting burden from these organizations that do not often have a lot of capacity or capability to do so. In terms of sharing data, I think we would need to draw a line between county, regions. I don't think we're in a position to say, hey, such and such region, this other region is doing better than you, or this region is this kind of successful. We're anticipating that the census will be also releasing updates because this is an online census. They should be getting their data in live. So hopefully we can react to that response rate as well.
Thank you. I think that's it for questions. So for everyone who's on the webinar, you will receive a recording of this webinar as well as the presentation today. So we have a few more webinars planned for this year. The next one is on Monday, March 25th, focused on fundraising. And if you have any questions, you can email us at this census email address. Thank you, Stephanie, for joining us today, and thank you for everyone who tuned into the webinar.